Well, thanks very much for sorting yourselves out so quickly there. I'd like to first of all thank our panellists tonight for giving up their time. This is a bit of a dream panel, actually. If I could have picked 5 people to be here, these are the 5 I would have picked, I'll tell you. And that, I know. But it is good, and I'll introduce them to you. We would like to hear quite as much as possible from the panellists, so if you've got questions, and there'll be plenty of chance to ask them, could we have questions and not speeches from the floor would be really great. We understand that these are controversial issues in many respects, but we'd like an informative and constructive discussion, so let's keep it as polite as we always used to at community forum events. As the community forum itself, we're not reaching a position on this. We're not a campaigning organisation. It's for everyone here to draw their own conclusions. I will have my own conclusions, and Sam and everyone else involved in the forum, but we don't have a unified one on that by any means. The forum will not be submitting a response to the thing. That's for individuals to do. So this is all up to you. There are a lot of ways to respond to this consultation. There's a really good online form at the website, which I've already been through. You can just tick a few boxes to give your opinion, and it's all over in about 30 seconds. Or you can write proper long-form answers if you've got points to make. So it's really well designed. The brochure, which most of you will have had through your doors, shows many other ways of responding, including mailing in, emailing in, all sorts of things. And if you don't have one of the brochures, they have at the door, and I think there are some available around. So there's plenty of ways for you to put forward your opinions in the next 4 weeks. So let me introduce our panellists. Andrew, you've already met, the project manager from the Greater Cambridge Partnership. Andrew's an experienced transport planner, and he'll be, and he's kicked things off, as we know, with the explanation of what's happening. Sam, you also already met in her role as chair of the community forum, but she's here on this panel as a Hills Road resident who's been following the project very closely and has, some interesting ideas about what it means for Queen Edith. John Mead here, whose nameplate disappeared, I'm really sorry, is a local environmental enthusiast who probably knows the fields to the south of the biomedical campus around the Nine Wells Nature Reserve area as well as anyone. John does an annual survey of the wildlife in the area, and I hope you'll get the chance to talk to us about that. Edward Lee, second from the end, is chair of Smarter Cambridge Transport, which is a voluntary group set up 3 years ago to get public debate going about the best transport ideas for Cambridge. There are really a lot of great ideas coming from the public, and I think and hope the authorities are listening to them. And Smarter Cambridge Transport is trying to make sure those ideas get out there. And at the far end, I'm delighted to have Lewis Herbert here. Lewis is leader of the City Council, but he's here as Vice Chair of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Executive Board. As such, he's one of a group of 3 people, or 5 on the board, but 3 who have voting say, who have the say really on everything that the Greater Cambridge Partnership comes up with. As the other 2 voting members are councillors from outside the city, Lewis is really the city's voice on the Greater Cambridge Partnership Board, so he has to try to come to a decision that reflects that of the majority of the city, which must be very difficult indeed. So we will take questions from the floor, but I've gathered together a few questions which a couple have just asked me just now actually, but also some that we put together beforehand, including down at the pub last week. And if I address them to a specific member of the panel each, which will give them a chance to introduce themselves and their ideas at the same time. So if I may start off with Sam as a resident and perhaps having the residents' representative on the panel. My question, Sam, is why is all this so important to us here in Queen Edith's?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure I am completely confident that the GCP have bought into the idea as heavily as I have that this is important for Queen Edith's. My feeling as a resident is that GCP are largely conceiving of this as a means of getting people in from South Cambs to the campus. I don't think that the impacts of any of these 3 strategies on Queen Edith's, even though that will be the terminating point of all 3 strategies, has necessarily been taken account of And that's one of the things that I think we can really make clear this evening. And if you're coming to the information evening that GCP are doing here next Thursday evening, do get that point across to them. So specifically, all three strategies are different and have different pros and different cons for Queen Edith. And I think that offers up an opportunity for a really genuine debate about what this community is about, what this neighbourhood is for. Is this neighbourhood just collateral damage for the expansion of the biomedical campus, where we suck it up because we're told it has to be that way? Or are there genuine things, genuine goods that we can get out of this? So I hope the discussion this evening will explore some of that territory, because frankly I don't think we would have filled this room full of you tonight if you didn't also share that opinion.
Thank you, Sam. Have you got any initial thoughts about the three strategies and how they affect us?
Well, as I say, I mean, I think they're very different, and that's what makes it so interesting. So, strategy one, I know there's concern, I've heard it voiced locally already, about the impact on the 9 Wells Nature Reserve.
So strategy one is the
busway up from
complete off-road major mass transit busway that goes directly all the way from the A11 into the biomedical campus, nowhere near other roads, near Sawston, and just goes off straight through the fields.
Yeah, and so I think that will clearly have an impact on the 9 Wells Nature Reserve. It will have an impact on our ability potentially to access 9 Wells, and I know that's a very valued piece of green space for people dog walking, taking their kids out, whatever. I think there's also a legitimate concern about that being a very convenient way of opening up lots of South Cambs for development. And I can hear mms in the room, so I'm clearly not the only one. Strategy, but on the other hand, I think there could be an upside to strategy one, so I'm trying to be balanced here. I can see some skeptical faces. Strategy one could enable the completion of off-road cycle path taken in conjunction with the Chisholm Trail, which will go through the centre of town, such that you would be able to cycle from the A11 all the way up to St Ives off-road. I think that would be great. And I think that would turn it from a project which is just about meeting South Cambs' commuter need to being a leisure asset for people in the south of the city who want to get out. So that's my take on strategy one at the moment, but I am waiting to learn more this evening.
Strategy two is building an inbound-only busway all the way from the A11 to the Abraham Road Park and Ride, which is also known as the Shelford Roundabout or Golter Roundabout. Then there would be an off-road busway which would head off westwards across the fields and end up at the edge of the biomedical campus, or kind of somewhere in the middle, I think. Not quite sure where.
And that one bothers me, because what it does is carve out a very convenient space that would be between the busway and Abraham Road, which is land which is owned by the County Council. We know the County Council is looking to leverage its assets, shall we say. We know that the Greenbelt study doesn't see any reason why that land couldn't be developed. So that, to me, seems to have some risks associated with it from a Queen Edith perspective. And moving swiftly onwards to strategy three.
So strategy three would have the inbound bus lane all the way from the A11 all the way to the Shelford roundabout. And then instead of the bus route then going off across the fields, it would just carry on down the A1307 down Abraham Road to Hills Road as an inbound bus lane, which would mean creating some space, I suspect, on Abraham Road.
Yeah, Andrew will correct me, but I think when we've talked about it before, they'd be looking for 6 metres of additional space on Abraham Road and Hills Road to get to the roundabout, which is a not insignificant slab of the available space. I also worry about the impact of the construction period on our ability to move around. We know what happened when they were putting the cycleways in and Adam Brooks roundabout. Sometimes, from our perspective, it's not just about long-term outcomes, it's about what happens in the middle of making the omelette. and there were quite a lot of broken eggs during that period. So that would bother me, and I also genuinely am curious about how durable a solution that would be, because it seems to me, okay, it's presumably certainly the cheapest of the options. I would imagine it would be relatively quick to put in, but how many years of capacity is that going to buy us before we're just back where we started and looking at option 2 or option 1 as well? And if strategy 3 goes ahead and then there's an upgrade later on, no one's going to come back and restore Bebraham Road to how it was before. So I think there are risks associated with that. Sorry, was that a very gloomy answer? I was trying to be balanced.
Thank you very much, Sam. Next, I'd like to turn to Edward Lee, if I may. Edward from Smarter Cambridge Transport. To go slightly off-piste from the specifics we've just been going to, I'd like to ask Edward, what options might be considered that aren't on the consultation survey?
Okay. I've really only started to get to grips with this scheme. It's definitely the most complex of all of the schemes that Greater Cambridge Partnership is pursuing at the moment. There are a lot of unknowns with it, and actually a lot of options as well. So it's actually really difficult to see. I find it very difficult to understand quite why we're at 3 options already, because I think that we haven't really ruled out some of the other options that have been discussed. I know that the Haverhill, reopening the original railway line to Haverhill was given it was assessed, and it was given a BCR benefit cost ratio of 0.99, which is actually not that bad. It's essentially 2 or greater is fit for funding. But 0.99 is sort of where you sort of expect to be really on a scheme when you're first assessing it, and you haven't really been able to look at all of the benefits it would deliver. And rail does deliver, as the Borders railway line up in the north of England from Scotland has shown, railway can deliver huge benefits which are not really captured in this benefit cost ratio calculation. So I think there is still some questions about that. Certainly it would take longer to deliver because it would require Network Rail. And Network Rail currently have far more on their plate than they can manage. So it would need private funding and probably to be set up as a separate company in the way that East West Rail is. But I do feel that it shouldn't have been pushed off the table quite so quickly. There is another option, which is a light rail option that takes a route along the railway line through Great Shelford alongside the existing railway line, and follows essentially the alignment of the original railway line south of Great Shelford and past the east side of Sawston, and then would probably depart from there to go up to Babraham. Now one of my questions actually is why strategy 1 doesn't connect with Babraham at all. It runs some way south of there. Now I know there are sensitivities about the land there, but there's also a need for the village to be connected, and also for the Babraham Institute, which I presume has plans to expand over the coming years. So I think there's the question mark about why strategy 1 doesn't pick up Babraham. And but following the idea of the light rail link, you would want to pick up Babraham, and then you'd want to go into Grants Park and the Abingtons, and then probably continue east to Haverhill. Haverhill, by the way, is the largest town in the country that doesn't have a railway line, a railway station. It also doesn't have any dual carriageway connecting it to the rest of the road network. It has quite a lot of heavy industry industry that requires heavy freight movement. So there's a lot of heavy freight moving in and out of Haverhill. And that's actually one of the arguments for having a heavy rail link there, is because you get to shift some of that freight onto rail. My worry is that if we don't get this right, we're going to end up with the A1307 being dualled all the way to Haverhill, come what may. Because that's, up until Greater Cambridge Partnership came along, that was the preferred option, and probably, well, not probably, it is the still preferred option for councillors in Suffolk and in rural Cambridgeshire around there, because most people drive now, so what they want is better provision for driving. It's very difficult for people to get their head around the idea that actually they might change their own behaviour and use public transport. It's always somebody else who's going to use the bus, who's going to take the bus. It's not themselves. I'd say that there are two major options that I think are omitted, which is the heavy rail and the light rail alignment that picks up all of the settlements. At the moment, the strategy one is assuming it is this thing that's described as a metro, but I mean this is a misnaming. It is a busway. Even if the vehicle looks a little bit like a tram, it is essentially running like a bus. And actually the interesting discussion we were having today is about the difference in ride quality between a rail-based thing and a bus. There are probably most people in this room, actually we're going to get a show of hands, how many people in this room can read a book comfortably on a bus? And how many people in this room can comfortably read a book on a train? And this is actually quite an important point in terms of if you were commuting from Haverhill, would you want to sit on a bus where you'd feel motion sickness if you did any work or read a book? It's going to be a half hour, maybe 40-minute journey. So I think we have to think quite seriously about what it's like to use the public transport. And if it is this sort of this CAM metro thing, which is essentially a bus on a segregated route, it's not going to have the pulling power that a tram or a light rail service would. So I think that's quite an important factor that just hasn't even been touched on.
Thank you, Edward. I want to lob something else into the mix now, which I'm going to throw at Andrew. The park and ride, which has been described by the A11, which is where everything's going to be starting, does look as if it's pretty much out in the country, not near too much. However, there's a huge new town just been announced called North Uttlesford, which is actually in Essex. Basically, they want to build a town right in the corner of Essex, which actually is going to be a satellite town of Cambridge, only we're not going to get any say over it. It's planned to be 5,000 homes, which makes it bigger than Sawston or Camborne. And it's going to be right near this park and ride. So my question to Andrew is this something that was just lobbed onto your plans, and have you been able to take account of it, or did you know all about this from the outset?
We did know about it. The County Council, I believe, has actually objected to the inclusion of the Uttlesford Garden community in the local plan on the grounds of the transport impacts of that. But nonetheless, in our planning, we've taken account of an optimistic, or what some people might call pessimistic, view of growth. So therefore, in our transport planning modelling, we have included the Uttlesford Garden community. We've included aspirations for the biomedical campus to grow to 28,000 jobs. We've included 5,000 extra homes in Suffolk, including additional, on top of that, 4,000 something hundred pounds in homes in Haverhill, as well as growth at the Baberham and Granter Park campuses. And included that in our factoring. The reason for locating, and I'll try to answer Edward's question, why does the road, why does Strategy 1 go to where it does? It's partly because it follows the old railway line, partly because that then safeguards a potential future extension to Haverhill. When we looked at the traffic on the A1307 at Baberham, we found that some 50% of the traffic there has actually come off the A11, whereas traffic on the A1307 at Baberham, about half of that actually turns onto the A11. So therefore, a site close to the A11, in our modellings we looked at sites which were further out, as well as there we got the highest usage of park and ride at that location. Clearly, the Uttlesford Garden community is further to the south, but we are trying to capture traffic on both the A1307 axis and the 1301 axis, and indeed the modelling of Strategy 1 shows that we get traffic reductions on both those roads. So in terms of a location that is reasonably well optimised in terms of being able to intercept traffic on the major road network. In terms of, well, why doesn't it go to Baberham campus? Well, one reason for that would be going further north up towards the A1307. The distance from the campus to there isn't that great, and in fact actually the moment we have an indicative route, possibly with a park and ride site there, we might be able to, if that was located say north of the route at that point, then actually that would then be quite close to the Baberham campus, so there would be links. It's not that far off the route, and when you consider other sources of people and destinations of movement, it's difficult to say whether it should go to one or any particular location. So in terms of the planning at the moment, we feel for a route that makes the maximum use of the disused railway, then that is the best location for it to go in terms of intercepting the traffic. But we haven't ruled out possibly looping up a bit further to the north beside the A11, say, depending on how the detailed design works out, the route is indicative.
Okay, so things are still a bit flexible then?
Yes, indeed, yes, it's an indicative route at the moment. I think we want to try and keep out of the more valuable countryside as much as we can, and if there is redundant infrastructure to use, then try and make the best use of it, but it is at the moment an indicative route. I'd like to try and just respond to Edward's points about rail options. The heavy rail solution to Haverhill was considered in the early stages of this project, but was rejected by the Greater Cambridge Executive Board as essentially in that scope being unaffordable. But Edward is quite correct. He did have a benefit cost ratio of 0.99, although that represents on the DFT scale of things low value for money, it is by no means vetoed on that respect. The issue was the capital cost of doing that. We did look again last year, or started looking again last year, at light rail solutions, including a route that followed the railway line through Great Shelford. But in the light of the Steer-Davies-Cleave report that was commissioned by Greater Cambridge Partnership and the Combined Authority, which recommended a metro system based on these rubber-wheeled trams without rails, we stopped work on that because clearly at that point developing a light rail solution was not going to be compatible with what was then being envisaged by the end of this options study for a Cambridgeshire Metro proposal. I think I covered in my presentation, and it is available in the report by Steer-Davies-Cleave on the Combined Authority website, is that there are no cities in the world the size of Cambridge with an extensive light rail network.
Okay.
The reason the Combined Authority proposed the solution, or Steer-Davies-Cleave proposed the solution, is simply that it is the only one, or arguably the only one, which is affordable for Cambridge, but there are further stages to go through yet.
Thank you. There's a group of Queen Edith's residents that don't have a representation in this room, and indeed don't even have a vote. And that's the wildlife on the fields south. And if you have a look at a map of Queen Edith's, it does surprise many people that actually half of Queen Edith's area is the fields to the south of the city. So I'd like to introduce John Mead now and ask John what he thinks are the environmental and ecological differences between the three strategies that are being proposed at the moment.
Right. Yes, I've been studying for the last 6 or 7 years the fields that are immediately south of the Addenbrooke site. So that's sort of between the hospital and Baberham Road and Granham's Road, and then sort of back along the railway line. That sort of patch of fields which sort of centre around the Nine Wells Reserve and White Hill, which is the little hill. Wonderful place. And well, So I can comment particularly about that particular area, but I can add one or two slightly more general comments as well about these sorts of developments. As far as the area itself is concerned, it's a surprisingly rich area in terms of wildlife. I mean, it's quite easy to look at the arable fields around Cambridge and think, gosh, it's a bit of a desert, you know. But it's those fields are not. I mean, while I particularly focus on the bird populations, and I've recorded 87 different species since I've been looking at those areas, which astonishes me, I must say. And I'm particularly interested in the farmland birds, which you know, they're actually sort of seen as indicators of biodiversity, and a lot of them are in a huge amount of trouble. And I do surveys for people like the RSPB as well, and the density of some of these what we call red list species, that's species that are you know, where populations have declined dramatically, sometimes by 90% or more in recent decades. There's many more of those in the fields around Nine Wells than there are in the other places that I've studied for the RSPB and the BTO. So that's species like grey partridge. I regularly see 80 or 90 of those in the autumn scattered across those fields, which is a remarkably high count. I mean, only in other studies where a huge amount of work has been done to safeguard birds, do you get anything approaching those numbers. And but I also look at some of the other wildlife as well, and it's worth just noting that there are large populations of brown hares on those fields. Just the other day there were 25 at least, which again is a huge number. And there are quite important water vole populations, both along the stream that actually comes out of Nine Wells, and the funny little ditch that runs up along the cycle path as well, going, you know, sort of going almost parallel with the new Adam Brooks access road. So both options 1 and 2 on the strategies 1 and 2, I mean, would have an impact on this area. The first strategy looks as if it would run very, very close to Nine Wells. That would particularly affect the water vole populations, and I mean there's actually a legal requirement to survey and to make sure, you know, water voles are in so much trouble that you know, the partnership would need to take measures to ensure that they didn't actually damage the populations there. Easier perhaps said than done. There's also that little network of fields and hedges and woods and things there, which we'd also need to look at the impact of that. Strategy 2, that's sort of further away from Nine Wells. It runs, I imagine, alongside a hedge, which is quite important, and it's one of the areas where there are populations of birds like partridges and corn bunting. So again, it would be very important to look at you know, the impact on those. But just to add 2 or 3 words about the sort of slightly broader impact. I can't speak about the rest of Strategy 1 and the fields that those run through, and how valuable or otherwise those may be. But and the other thing to say is that guided buses are so rare that I've not been able to trace any sensible research into the impact that guided buses actually have on the environment. There is a certain amount of research on other transport projects that are sort of somewhat similar to this, particularly roads, but also to railways. And the impacts, just to summarise them very quickly, you have the construction impact, which I know was particularly problematic on 1 or 2 stretches of the existing guided busway. There's also a little guided busway between Luton and Dunstable somewhere, apparently, and with that they took some care to actually, in the most sensitive part of the route, to actually construct between September and March, and to take other measures to avoid damaging it. So that's obviously something that's important to consider. But construction is one whole clutch of issues which could damage wildlife populations for some time to come. But apart from that, you are looking at issues like actual loss of habitat. I mean, the existing busway has damaged the habitat going through the railway cutting, and that's had a quite negative impact on populations of very rare butterflies that are there. There's also the risk of habitat fragmentation. It becomes harder to get from one side of a development to the other, and there's the risk of things being killed by buses as they fly through the road. And as I said, there is no evidence about that, and that's obviously a bigger issue with some of the other developments.
Thank you, John. Andrew, could I just ask one question? Most of us, when we think of busways nowadays, we think of basically a concrete track, like we've got out to Trumpington and that. But all your illustrations here were basically of a more conventional road, so what would it be?
There's a few technical issues to resolve in that respect. I would say that the concrete trough solution is not the only solution that's available because of the advancements of technology and the benefits of time. The current statutory route, the Transport and Works Act, currently only recognises railways and guided busways, or busways, but guided solutions. And the formal proposals to Cambridge Metro envisage a certain amount of autonomy. And indeed, the example that's been given by Steve Cleese shows a vehicle in China which follows a very broad dotted line, for example, using an optical system.
Is there a cost difference between putting these two different types of track down, a road and a concrete trough track?
I haven't got the figures on the top of my head for the costs. I was involved in the construction of the concrete guided busway to the north.
Yeah.
At this moment in time, we're envisaging a vehicle that would follow on a flat surface, but the type of guidance is not resolved. There are choices available: wire guidance following a rail set in the road surface, curb guidance, or is not the only available option.
All right, thank you. One more question from my set I've got here, which give Lewis a chance to speak at last. Thank you, Lewis, for being so patient. And I really wanted to just ask about how residents get representation to the Greater Cambridge Partnership in particular. On the Assembly, it seems to me that business and the university all have places, and then there are councillors who are, one assumes, representing the people of the area, but there ain't no councillors from around this way as far as I know. So, we do feel a little bit disenfranchised from the process, and I just wondered what your thoughts on that were, Lewis, in terms of how we get our voice heard.
Yeah, I hope I get the opportunity to make a few comments about the overall need or assessment.
Please do.
Well, first of all, as you said in your introduction, I'm the city's representative. I'm a Queen Edith resident, and I also have obviously a wider aspiration that both for planning and for the wider development of Cambridgeshire that we rebalance growth, and Haverhill is part of that. So in terms of the representation on the Greater Cambridge Assembly, there are 9 councillors. There's representation there from Sawston and Whittlesford directly on there, so you've got people who may not be in Queen Edith, but they want to know what's going on in the scheme. There are 3 city councillors, one of whom is in Coleridge Ward, which isn't too far from these parts, so he's obviously someone who would be worth involving, as well as myself. So I think the governance, I mean, I will take responsibility for a lot in the city. but the governance was set up before I was about.
Indeed.
It was a deal struck between the then Liberal Democrat administration and the government. And one of the things there, one of the good things, is there is at least some reserve influence in that if there's a scheme that I, as the city representative, don't like, then I can block it, at least for one cycle, and obviously use that opportunity. So, in terms of where we've got to, just briefly, the worth of this project was seen as a principle by a range of people, including myself, in 2015, when the county, largely then county council perspective on what was good for Cambridge was the running agenda for the Greater Cambridge Partnership when it was set up. So I do start with the principle that a scheme that makes the 1307 something more than a queue in the morning, and that brings high quality public transport as a real option for Haverhill and for what are relatively poorly connected job locations that came through in a previous South Cambridgeshire plan out of 2006 is essential. And so what this, the idea of a scheme wasn't part of the original brief that the Greater Cambridge Partnership inherited, but we decided that whilst a lot of it would be still after 2020, that there was a need.
Yeah.
And part of that is that the biomedical campus and the scale of jobs there and the other sites were just not addressed with proper transport when they were put together. So I just start with that point, but as the leader of the council, as the strategic lead on planning across Cambridgeshire, I am determined that there is a sustainable development. We will be getting more jobs in Cambridge over the next 20 to 40 years, but we don't need to take the kind of housing development that necessarily matches that.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure we've got a few questions from the floor, so I think have we got a microphone out there? Yeah, we have. So if you'd like to wave the back, perhaps I'll let you choose and get to it with the microphone. That's fine. Perhaps you could say who you are and if you're a resident or whatever.
I'm Colin Murty. I'll get an opportunity to meet many of you soon. I was just looking at the existing cycleway that's just to the north of option 1. And I'm wondering if you'd considered following that route rather than the former rail route and leaving that rail route available possibly for future use.
You mean the dotted line that lies to the north? We wanted to bring the route as close as possible to the centres of population so that people did not have to, or have the opportunity not to have to drive to the station or
So
stop.
So
Essentially it purposefully touches Sawston, Stapleford and Great Shelford in order to maximise potential usage of the system, which wouldn't be the case if we followed that. And it also takes us further towards the route which we consulted upon in 2016, which is a more northerly route, which did attract a certain amount of concern because it did bisect that area. And we feel that by following as closely as possible the existing built-up areas within reasonable consideration of operating speeds and so on, we feel that we are leaving the greater part of the area untouched, but we do recognise the challenges created by the landscape there.
It just seemed that you were partially duplicating the use of that existing route, and that it might somewhat address several of those points.
Well, yes, I mean it's a route, but I don't know exactly in what respect it is. Were we to build a tramway, busway, road, or whatever along that, it would change the character of it. It wouldn't be the same use as it is now, so it would not be a neutral impact.
Okay, thank you very much.
Direct him, otherwise he'll just look.
Oh, come on, he's great.
Hi, Mike Jump, I'm resident. I've got a question about the traffic flow. How many people will be brought into Cambridge on these 3 routes during the rush hours in the morning? And how do they get home again on strategies 2 and 3?
On strategies 2 and 3, the evening peak hour is spread over a greater period, so there isn't the same degree of congestion that there is now. So if they catch a bus in the morning, the purpose of a bus lane is to enable a bus to bypass congestion. There is less congestion outbound in the evening, so there is less need for bus lanes.
Seeing the traffic along those roads at rush hour time, it's an awful lot of it.
Yes, there is, but it's not quite as slow moving or even at a standstill as it is in the morning peak.
And what were the numbers?
I haven't got the numbers on the top of my head, I'm afraid. I have a fairly good memory, but I can't remember.
I would have thought it's a fairly important thing for the whole strategy to know how many people you're moving.
We have the numbers, I'm afraid I don't have them in my head.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've got a question over there. Barry Hunt, resident of Strangeways Road, but I think I'm more or less following up the previous question, because as I understand it, this is about trying to solve a problem for the congestion of the A1307 coming into Cambridge. It therefore is essential, to my mind, that we know, you've quoted actually in your strategy document the projected percentage increase in public transport. What I'd like to know is what are the projected public decreases in car traffic for each of the 3 strategies.
I can give you that figure as somebody would just take a bit of paper off the projector. So daily traffic changes. With strategy 1, we see up to 1,600 vehicles a day less in 2031. With strategy 3, it would be only 400 reduction. And with 1307, depending on whether it's C is Wandlebury, so with strategy 1, 1,800 vehicles a day less in 2031, 1,700 a day less with strategy 3. Strategy 2 does less well because the connection to the Babram Road Park and Ride site increases the attraction of Babram Road Park and Ride as a destination, so it draws more traffic in. In terms of the impact on the...
Is that based on existing traffic use, or is that on projected?
This is based on projected traffic in 2031. So in terms of mode change, the current mode share for the private car, if we do nothing, is 46%, where that would drop to 30% in 2031 with the scheme. And in terms of public transport, the current mode share is just over 50%, and that would increase to 67% depending on the strategy.
Thank you, Sam.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify something which may not have become apparent, depending on how much detail you've read the literature in. All of the modelling and the discussion about modal shift and so on is dependent also on the city access study project coming to fruition and delivering a 10 to 15% reduction in traffic going on from Queen Edith into the city and across the city. So these modal shift figures are quite impressive for some of these schemes, but they are dependent on other things happening that are a bit of a black box at the moment. So I don't know to what extent you can really regard them as standalone figures.
Edward? One of the things you need to bear in mind is that any vehicle that's heading towards Cambridge is doing one or two things. It's either stopping and parking somewhere at Cambridge, or it's driving out the other side. Now, we could and should be doing a lot more to discourage people from driving through. And actually one of the things that we could be doing, and actually the Mayor I know is planning to do, is to put a junction between the A14 West and the A11 South. And that would allow traffic to go get onto the A14 westbound without going onto local roads. But on the issue about vehicles coming into the city and parking, just as a thought experiment, imagine that we set a target, as they have in Copenhagen, of reducing the amount of parking available by 3% every year. And it's not enough to cause a great deal of pain, but it sets what's called a direction of travel. And businesses and residents will start to adapt. And after a period of time, the volume of traffic naturally falls because there aren't the parking spaces for them to head to. So therefore, claiming that the number of vehicles trying to get into Cambridge is going to be increased by a vast number is based purely on the idea that there's going to be that level of increase in parking availability too. And that would clearly be madness. We need to be reducing the parking availability, and therefore the amount of traffic that's coming in will be reducing. The question is whether that reduction would have an economic impact. In other words, the jobs in the city wouldn't be able to recruit people because they can't drive in. But that's why we need the good public transport. So it's a more complex argument than simply saying that if we do nothing, we'll end up with tailbacks all the way to Haverhill.
Thank you.
Can I just have a quick supplementary to that?
Yep.
Having asked the question about absolute numbers, what's the total number of car journeys coming in per day from, for example, the A1307? You talk about a reduction of 1,800, but from what?
Again, I'm afraid I don't have that number. I can provide that number in terms of the response after this meeting, but I don't have that number on my head, I'm afraid.
I'm trying to get an idea of whether it's a big percentage drop or a small percentage drop.
Well, I think in terms of the numbers of vehicles, the number of vehicles less, that's probably the order of about 10% in terms of daily traffic. But I would have to look up figures and come back with a written answer.
And I should point out Edward I know knows the answer to this, but a 10% reduction in traffic makes a much more than 10% reduction in congestion, am I right?
Yes, essentially it's what's called a non-linear process. In other words, you can have a steady increase in traffic without any problems, and then it gets a point. And you'll know this when you've driven on a road where it gets busier and busier, and it gets to a point where you start getting a bit uncomfortable because you're now having to drive too close to the vehicle in front. So you then slow down to open up the space in front. And that process happens very rapidly, which is why you can be bowling down the motorway, and then within the space of less than half a mile, you're at a standstill. And it's that process of concertinaing. So a road has a certain level of capacity, and then beyond that, it rapidly falls off. So yes, if you reduce the traffic volume...
And this is why your average taxi driver says half the traffic on the road is taking people to school because during the holidays there's no congestion. And actually, it's only a 5 or 10% something reduction in traffic.
I mean, it has been measured.
It has an amazing amount of effect on congestion.
Yeah.
Okay, who else we've got? We've got to bowl through a couple more questions if we can.
Hi, I'm Henry Gimsel, I'm a resident in Queen Edith. Given the rationale for not considering further light rail is that there's no equivalent system in the world for a city like Cambridge, which I'm not totally convinced by, given a city like Heidelberg. But are there examples in the world, to give examples of self-driving bus systems in the world for any city similar size to Cambridge?
If I could just show you a couple of slides. This is the appraisal done by T. Davis Gleave, which looks at that's the metropolitan population, that's the system length in the city. So there's Tyneham Weir, Nottingham, Sheffield, Edinburgh, Blackpool, other cities around the world, Marseille, Copenhagen, and so on. Here's Cambridge. Nearly all those cities are all bigger than Cambridge City, and so generally speaking, as population increases, the length of the system increases. So Cambridge is down here, so there are 3 cities which are smaller than Cambridge that have light rail systems. The one in Urbane is 2.7 kilometres in length, it's a single track. If we want an ambitious system for Cambridge, then we are going against the general trend in terms of the extent of the network for the size of Cambridge. The reason for that is you need a certain amount of population within a reasonable distance of a light rail stop for the system to offer value for money. Cambridge is small and the area around it is relatively sparsely populated. Therefore, the value for money for light rail simply doesn't stack up. We're going to have the system, we need to get the capital costs down, and that's what the Cambridge Autonomous Metro provides. In terms of are there examples working, This is the system that's coming into operation in China. This is the model that Steer Davis Cleave are suggesting would be the model for the Cambridge Autonomous Metro. Now, people say it's a bus. I'm afraid that doesn't look like a bus to me, that's a tram. The only difference is it's got rubber wheels.
As I wrote in the Cambridge Independent a couple of weeks ago, we had exactly that promised to us by Steer Davis Cleave, the fully guided busway. It looked exactly like that, and what we got was a bus.
Yes.
So why is it going to be different this time?
I think because the will of the combined authority, the Mayor and Greater Cambridge Partnership, is that Cambridge deserves something better than just buses. I think a common complaint about people say is about the bus system in Cambridge.
Yeah.
We have an opportunity to provide something different, but the money will need to be found for it.
So, sorry to chip in on that. This conversation is being very heavy on the infrastructure side, and that's, I guess, because that's the information we've got on the table at the moment. But there's the service side, and people around here will be aware that Stagecoach can play fast and loose with services, can run them when it wants, charge what it wants, divert them when it wants. So I'm still not clear what the mechanism is once some form of infrastructure has gone in that would actually guarantee a decent service level at a sensible price.
I wonder if Lewis has got any thoughts on that.
Well, I'm hoping that the Mayor will consider franchising as part of a bus review that he's leading on. It was initiated by South Cambridgeshire because they have precious few bus services. I mean, in the background, obviously there's a number of threads here, and the Greater Cambridge Partnership members have still got to make up their minds after they hear the consultation. But we have to have transformational improvement in public transport. I think a lot of people in this room don't use the bus. Certainly, the vast majority of people.
Okay. How many people here use the bus
regularly? Okay. All right. Maybe I'm seeing a number of people that are more than I expected. If I went out further out into South Cambridgeshire, I don't think people do. So whatever is used, and that is the thread for thinking about Cam Metro, but also however that develops of having something that's really high quality as bus transport. Sorry, what was the original point?
I mean, is there a way we can perhaps not be so dependent on the whims of Stagecoach?
Well, I just think on this system, so firstly there's the bus review, and I'm not totally convinced the Mayor will go down the route I would like to go. But on this system, I'm moderately optimistic that the funding can be found so that effectively, if you look at the Steer Davis Cleave's proposal, you've effectively got a north-south crossover, because Network Rail block the sensible option, which is for there to be far more transport along the existing main route rail, north-south. And in that, you are effectively taking the fact that we've got a historic core where I don't think it's practical even to put tram lines through the centre of Cambridge. We've got cycles, we've got a congested area. So the ability for this to be a transformational scheme will be enhanced if we can have 12 kilometres of tunnels. And it will be, Chris, in the hands of setting up that metro or the network to say who's going to have it. And Stagecoach have got too much power on the busway. They are the sort of 75% shareholder in terms of the buses on it, and they've also got ticketing bullying power because they can influence which tickets people buy and whether they use it. So it's in the city. If we can get the Cam Metro, and Edward's got a different view about some of the issues there, or if we can get a transformational system through the city of one form or another, it will be in the hands of the people who operate that to make sure we get the best public transport operator, not just the powerful one.
Thank you. Right, we've got time for a couple more questions, I think, and then we'll have to knock it on the head, unfortunately.
Yeah, my name is Manas Dev. I'm the Conservative candidate for City Council election. My question is for Strategy 2. In my mind, that seems to be a reasonable option. For inbound bus lane from Abraham Research Campus to the Abraham Park and Ride, how much agricultural land do you have to acquire, and what's your plan to acquire that? Is it easily accessible, and what would be the estimated cost?
Part of the route for the off-highway link goes through land which is currently zoned for, currently anticipated to be developed in the future. So we are anticipating to make use of a route through which exists in some of the master planning for future expansion of the campus. We've deliberately routed the route alongside the existing boundary to avoid creating too much severance. The land take, I believe, is of the order of about 10 hectares, I believe, but I might stand to be corrected on that point. We have got estimates of the land costs. They're in the options report, which is available on the GCP website, but I'm afraid my memory doesn't serve me in terms of the cost of the land option. In terms of acquiring it, if we are able to demonstrate public interest, then compulsory purchase is an option. But my experience in the past over a great number of major projects is that land is almost always acquired by negotiation, albeit with a compulsory purchase order available should it be required under some additional persuasion. But yes, if there isn't the public interest, we will use compulsory purchase, but it would normally be our intention to try and acquire land by negotiation. If there's another part of your question that I haven't answered, please let me know.
Otherwise, we've got time for one more question, if you may. Someone's got the microphone. So.
Managed to know it. My name's Dan Grief. I have a question in particular for you, Andrew. The first one is about the numbers. £145 million for strategy number 1. The guided busway was £127 million over budget. So that was considerably smaller, and I'm including the other parts as well. It seems it was smaller than this plan, and it was, I think, originally about £73 million budgeted. So is £145 million really reasonable, considering the problems we've had with that project? Equally, the investment issues we've had and the development on Hills Road, which I don't think really came to the correct standard. So will it cost us longer in the long run? The other thing I'd like to raise, and this is for the whole panel, I was in Sawston recently talking to residents about something completely different, and one person had heard of this scheme. They don't seem to have any idea about this, and maybe it's a communication issue, and that's another debate to be had. But they were saying at the moment they don't see how this is going to change their lives. So my concern is, are we whizzing people in from further away to Cambridge? And the ultimate concern for me is, would that make Hills Road any quieter and less congested in the morning? Because at the moment I'm not convinced that it will. So I'm here in your hands, so you can convince me.
Okay, I will try and do that.
If you could do that briefly, Andrew, and then maybe everyone could have some concluding remarks. And we'll just finish.
Okay, so I'll try and deal with these points quickly. The price tag for the guided busway is confused by the difficult discussions with the contractor, and I'm not familiar with how the final cost was actually worked out, but I believe there was a considerable sum of money paid back in the end to the county council by the contractor. There are always issues around cost inflation on major projects. The Department of Transport at this stage of project requires us to include what's called an optimism bias, 44%. Interestingly enough, for rail projects they require it to be 66%. But for road projects, and this is essentially a road, they require a 44% optimism bias, which is factored into our estimates. We have much work to go. Construction costs increase year on year, and there are additional discussions going on about future procurement strategies, because there's a lot of infrastructure being built around Cambridgeshire at the moment, and indeed some of the biggest contractors in the country are currently busy on a road project between Cambridge and Huntingdon. Regarding the quality of Hills Road, I'm not familiar with the details myself. But
I'll take you for a tour if you like.
all I can say as a civil engineer is the projects I manage, I try to deliver to time, budget and quality, but I don't know what the issues were on that project or anything about it, so I can't really speak for that in detail.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Perhaps we could go down the line and if anybody's got any concluding remarks. Lewis?
Well, I mean, I'm open-minded, and that sounds like a cop-out, but I just want to hear what people have got to say. I do want to link this into the wider list of projects so that we've got the choice that we will be putting to people about, well, how do we reduce the number of cars coming in by other means. There's a separate city access report being published. I pay tribute to people in this forum for their forensics. I think you have to get into the detail on a number of these issues before you get to the bottom of them. I think that we do need to have something transformational, because I don't think people will otherwise use public transport. I think we have to think about the peak time, because that is when there is relative gridlock. I don't think the biomedical campus transport arrangements are adequate. I look forward to being around next Thursday as well and listening to people, and I hope that in the interim that people can either read the report or that the answers to the questions can be answered that have been raised. I'm sure there'll be more. I just come back to the point that the transport in this area isn't good enough. Particularly public transport, but I do take the point that 9 wells and the my dogs are precious as well. So it's a tricky balance, but I do think a scheme is going to be needed, and I do think it will benefit Queens.
Thank you, Lewis. Edward? Well, since we're in Queen Edith, I think obviously the questions that will be on your mind, and ones that I think you need to be putting into the consultation, is A, how is this going to be detrimental to your quality of life, and B, how could it be beneficial? And I think with strategy 1, with it coming in at the back of the campus, the route coming in at the back of the biomedical campus, it's quite hard to see how that will provide any benefit to you. But maybe the impact is reduced. With strategy 3, where it's dumping all the buses out there on the Brooks roundabout from the hospital, I think there are big questions about what the impact of that would be. And I think unless there is a sort of an extension of the metro through the middle of the biomedical campus to an interchange bus station at the front, so that people arriving on the bus and you indeed could walk to catch the metro into the middle of the city and to the north and west of the city, that would seem to me a good benefit to be seeking.
Thank you very much. Sam?
Okay, 3 points. The first is, why are we even having this conversation now? Addenbrooke's published its 2020 vision in 1999. That was the year after I moved into the area. We are fiddling around in 2018 trying to find a solution to this. We're being promised jam tomorrow in the form of this scheme, in the form of Cambridge South Station. I cannot understand why it has taken the best part of 2 decades to get some serious consideration of the impact of that planning permission to expand the campus on our neighbourhood. I'm very happy someone is tackling it now, but it is long overdue. Second issue around timing is that there is a very short-term step change at the end of 2018 and the start of 2019, when Abcam, Papworth and AstraZeneca all occupy their sites. There will be an extra 5,000 jobs on the campus. None of this project is there to address what happened at the end of 2018 and the start of 2019. But something needs to happen. We either need more park and ride frequency, or longer hours, or more affordability, or whatever else it is. But I don't see any discussion of what's going to happen, and I'm really worried about what happens in the next 6 months. The third thing is, it's great that you've all turned out tonight. I hope you go away and tell your neighbours that this is going on and they need to take an interest. My concern is that the ultimate client for this is the biomedical campus. We don't know what the biomedical campus's view on these strategies is. I would like some clarity about that, because if the campus is the client, then it may well be the case that it doesn't matter what any of us say or do, they will get their outcome. Now that may be the right way to weight it, but I don't understand what the decision-making process is for balancing residential interests and the campus's interests.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Just a few things. First of all, thank you for listening to me tonight. Just a few things just to wrap up. I think I have three big problems on this project, delivering this project. One is Linton, one is the Gog Hills, and the other one is Baberham Road and the biomedical campus. Whether there were an easy solution to every problem. I think that you obviously are interested in your lives, where you live, and the traffic here. But I think we also need to stand back and look at Cambridge as a whole and the future lives of everybody who lives and works in and around Cambridge and their needs as well. But yes, I do understand that there are local concerns, and we will do everything we can to address those concerns.
Thank you very much. John?
Or just to say that if anyone would like to read about the research I do, there might even be a link from then anyway, the reports are on my website. Chris will tell you how to get there.
Thank you very much. So yeah, a couple of concluding points. If you go to the Queen Edith's Community Forum website, which if you've got the pink leaflets, the domain names on the front cover, there's a link on the front page which gives you a link to another page there which has got a list of everything we've mentioned tonight, and also a list of local email newsletters and things you might like to get, and everything I can think of, and we'll probably add to that when other ideas come up. I think if I haven't got you on yet, John, I'll make sure I'll have that on. There is another meeting here there's an exhibition here next Thursday, 4 till 7 I believe, where there will be GCP officers here to talk to. So if you can go away and you want specific questions, you want to come back, come here between 4 and 7. It's not a presentation, it's just a drop-in meeting where you can actually chat to people one-to-one and really get questions answered about it. Finally, thank you all for coming tonight. I'm really pleased that it's been such a success, and we've had some really good discussion. Quite a few people put in an awful lot of effort to put tonight on, particularly in the publicity and putting out leaflets and stuff beforehand, and that's not been without cost. In fact, I think it's cost several £100 to put this evening on, which has just really come out of the pockets of the funds what limited funds we have in our organisation. So if you could drop a few coins in one of the pink buckets on the way out, we'd be really, really grateful. And finally, I'd like to say a very big thank you to our panel, who I think have been terrific and given some really good answers. So thank you very much.
Just want to say a massive thank you. If you're not aware, I went to Addenbrooke's last week and I saw the proposals in a corridor where you couldn't really stop, and it was all mad and manic. And about a week ago, Chris and Sam at the Queen Edith's Community Forum put this all on to make sure we could be informed. And I didn't know what to expect, but this is below my expectations. I think we should give a massive round of applause to them. Thank you so much.